Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about this issue of sex education, especially in the public schools. And that has always been controversial, but as you will find out very quickly, there are all sorts of advocacy groups that want to add a whole lot more to what your children and grandchildren might be studying in the schools. So that's why we thought it would be appropriate to spend some time talking with Lori Kuykendall, who's been on the program with us before. 25 years of experience in community health education with her degree from Texas A&M in community health education, and just about ready to get her master's degree in public health from Liberty University. We last time had her in when she was, of course, heading up Aim for Success, which is merged with Just Say Yes, but she is now the head of the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, and we have this press release that you can find on our website. But Lori, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's always a joy to visit with you and your listeners.
Let's, if we can, talk about the Medical Institute, because some of our listeners who have been listeners to Point of View for a long time remember when we used to do interviews. I think that first was back in the 1980s. So this is an institute that's been around for a while, hasn't it?
It has. Dr. Joe McElhaney founded Medical Institute for Sexual Health in 1992, left his full-time OBGYN practice there in Austin to run the Medical Institute full-time 3 years later in 1995, and returned last summer. He did actually at the age of 84 to be the president and CEO, to revamp, re-envision the organization and get us growing and launching back out again into the culture and communities and schools and families. And
again, like I said, 1980s, even before he started the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, we used to interview him because he was kind of the go-to expert when we were wondering about AIDS and STDs and all sorts of things. So that has been a very long history. But now, as you've been involved with this, you actually had a chance to do testimony in front of the Texas State Board of Education. Now, I recognize that some of you listening right now don't live in the state of Texas, but you can learn some great lessons, some vicarious lessons about what you can do in your state. But let's, if we can, explain that to individuals, because there are some things called TEKS, which stand for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And this is something that's supposed to be updated, but it's been a while since they've updated it. So give us the history.
It has been 22 years since the State Board of Education last updated health education standards. So important to understand the difference between standards and curriculum. Standards are standards, the expectations of what students will learn in classrooms that drive curriculum decisions at local school districts. So these standards were revamped this last year. Actually, it started about 3 years ago. A number of a very thorough review process involving national and state experts, local community professionals, and educators, all working together to make this the best document it could be for really what should be another decade or more it should hold for all children in Texas.
And again, these are hearings that last for hours. Now, you've sent me the links, and I'm glad that once it's recorded, I can fast forward past some of them, because, I mean, you've just got to have the patience of a saint to do this, but it's important because what is happening is a real battle. Now, many of our listeners would understand the issue of abstinence, what's sometimes called abstinence only, and some mischaracterizations that take place. But in addition to that, you have all sorts of other individuals that are associated with Planned Parenthood and SICUS and a variety of others, and they want to get all of their ideas in there. So give us kind of a sense of all the topics that were being addressed there as they were considering those standards and those various kinds of things that necessarily need to be part of the skill set for young people that are going to be in public school.
Well, interesting. So I mentioned these are health education standards, of which 1/6, or there's one of 6 strands, is dedicated to reproductive and sexual health. Mm-hmm. So then within that becomes standards really beginning at 5th grade with puberty and anatomy and physiology, developmental changes coming through 5th graders, and then on up into middle school, 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade. Health class is not required at the high school level any longer, so it was really important to look at the middle school standards and what would be taught to all middle school children in Texas. So beyond just puberty and anatomy and physiology, there were extended information, comprehensive information, as I like to say, actually, about healthy relationships, communication, setting boundaries, refusal skills, sexually transmitted diseases, preventing pregnancy, STDs, STIs, and also an important ad we saw was the emotional risks of early sexual activity.
Let me just mention, too, that if you find yourself saying, I'd like to get some of this information because I'm fighting this same battle in my school district, you can go to Medical Institute, or else it's medinstitute.org. We do have a link there, and if you can click on the picture there of Lori, it will take you to that website. And I think you're going to find some of that very helpful because there are free materials. There's a store for some of the books. There's videos and a variety of other issues. And just before we get into some of the other specifics, I thought maybe I'd set the scene by the fact that when we deal with this issue of sex education, it does seem to me, Lori, that the stakes are higher than they ever were. Since I'm the old guy around the table, maybe not as old as Dr. McElhaney, but pretty old, I can remember a time growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area in Berkeley where there were concerns about STDs. But there were really only 2 that we ever talked about. Both of those were curable with various kinds of antibiotics. Now, we can all debate on how many there are, but at least 3 dozen I think most people will agree with. Some of them are not curable, some are fatal. So the stakes for sex education are higher, I would think, than they've ever been before. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. The Centers for Disease Control says we are in an epidemic. Of course, we're talking pandemics, but an epidemic of STD or STI infection growing increasingly among young people. About half of all infections are in young people under 25, and that's millions and millions that we know of each year. And yet so often, because STDs are most often asymptomatic, people aren't aware they're even infected and continue to spread them through sexual activity, we continue to have an increase. I would say it's interesting, though, while STDs are raising and continue to raise to these epidemic levels, the pregnancy, birth, abortion, and sexual activity rates are not increasing.
I thought that's interesting.
They've been at a decline for the last 20 years, reaching some of their lowest points ever. And there's a number of different complex reasons why we see those numbers, some things going down, STDs going up, and really, to me, it shows clearly that sex is more dangerous now than it was before. Also shows that young people, we haven't studied and learned all the kinds of sexual activity they're involved with that may be putting them at risk, that may not be captured in particular questionnaires or surveys. So we have a lot to learn to figure out that dynamic, but it's an important part of this conversation, because many of the groups advocating for what is called comprehensive sex education, more on contraception, more on abortion information, would uphold that those rates are getting worse when really they've been getting better for the last 20 years.
Let's take a break. When we come back, maybe give a parental advisory, because we're going to get into some of the specifics. And frankly, maybe you might want young ears to hear these, but if you have a young person at home right now, especially during this Thanksgiving week, it might be a good time for them to listen in and learn a little bit more. We'll talk about all that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As this year winds down, many Americans focus on year-end giving. There is abundant evidence that charitable giving has been affected by our newly revised tax code that rewards fewer taxpayers with tax benefits. Howard Husek wrote about this earlier this month when many Americans took advantage of Giving Tuesday. His observations then are even more relevant at the end of December. Indiana University School of Philanthropy have been able to document two significant trends. While overall giving has slightly climbed, individual giving has declined. Actually, when you adjust for inflation, then giving by individuals declined even more. The major reason is the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which raised the standard deduction for federal income tax returns for a larger percentage of taxpayers. In the past, many of these taxpayers would itemize their charitable deductions. Now they no longer qualify for a charitable tax deduction. The Tax Policy Center acknowledges that most low and moderate income taxpayers do not claim a deduction for charitable contributions, largely because most of them do not itemize. The 90% of households that do not itemize make at least 40% of all charitable contributions. The remaining 10% that do itemize account for 60% of charitable contributions. I suspect that a significant percentage of those who don't itemize but do make charitable contributions are Christians who do so because they believe they should give to their church and Christian organizations. Some have suggested a future tax code revision providing for charitable giving tax credit or some other incentive. Of course, these proposals won't even be considered if we continue to elect to Congress representatives that try to find more and more ways to spend and continue to run up massive federal deficits. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Lori Kuykendall with us today, and we're talking about the Medical Institute for Sexual Health and these what are called TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which is part of what is actually put together by the State Board of Education. By the way, we've talked about that with Dr. Ray Boland in terms of origins and things like that. So these are in all sorts of different areas, but these have to do with the health issues. But Lori, for just a minute, since we are talking about what was happening in Texas, I have noticed a lot of national focus on what happens in Texas. National issues. New York Times has written about this. There have been a number of things, I think NPR and some others. So why is this important beyond just this one state of Texas? What's going on?
I think for several reasons. I'm glad that you asked, because I think that people have seen Texas as this, very conservative, put whatever the labels you want to add into there in a political climate. And with that has been our long-held focus on abstinence education. With that also has come some pretty alarming statistics about where we rank in teen pregnancy. We're the highest for repeat teen births. So there's a lot of interest in Texas. We're also a big state. 5.5 million children in Texas schools drive textbook markets nationally also. Mm-hmm. So I think people are concerned about what we're teaching here, because what is taught will be what is bought.
Yes.
There's also a concern and an interest over what many would say the abortion industry and dollars that would follow when more information is available, resources given referrals made for children to some of the abortion providers and other contraception and family planning clinics and such in the area. So it's very interesting and contentious, as you can imagine, the last 15 months have been.
Anybody that would like to find out more, they can find some of the links there, and it gets a little contentious. And you've got various groups in here. One, I'll just mention this in your press release, Power to Decide. That came originally from a group that was called the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. And they talk about this idea of consent. Now, who would be against consent? You know, the advocates for youth define consent as both people are actively willing to engage in sexual behavior, and yet that became a big issue. So talk about this idea of consent. What does that mean?
Well, I think Webster's dictionary would help us out even here on a fundamental level. Consent is to affirm or to assent, give approval for, right? It's a moving towards something. And it's important, if we're going to help young people avoid sexual activity, to move them away from that activity. So we use the term refusal skills instead. And what's even more concerning, if you look at some of the national curriculum providers who would like to be, bought here in Texas, it's easy to find concerning videos and role play activities, which are basically helping young people learn to negotiate for sexual activity. So these awkward, uncomfortable, really sexualizing conversations, activities, and videos in a classroom are not benign. Many have said consent prevents sexual abuse. How does saying yes prevent saying no to sexual abuse, right, is one thing I've tried to simplify for people in there, because consent sounds like a great idea, but yet when you see the curriculum activities, the way it's intended to be taught, it is harmful and sexualizing, normalizes sexual activity for kids.
Well, and again, a lot of what you're talking about is the idea of sexual risk avoidance. In some respects, we have to come back to something we just mentioned a minute ago, and that is, even as we've been in this broadcast, if the statistics are right, some individuals have picked up STDs even in the short amount of time you and I have been talking about, because the numbers are off the charts. And so if we want to prevent young people from getting an STD that may be with them for the rest of their life, that could completely destroy their life, or that they end up getting pregnant and then as a result have to decide whether to keep the child or go get an abortion and all the other aspects, there is some wisdom in recognizing that sexual risk avoidance, or what we call abstinence, is a very important thing that if we don't teach it, young people are going to be taking their cues from the culture, and that's not necessarily very optimal in terms of their health, is it?
Well, I think it's all in the direction and the single message approach, right? Young people need clear, directive messages to help guide them towards healthy decisions. So, and it's not just pregnancy. I think we've got to be careful. As you already have said, we've talked about STDs and emotional and mental health. Many of the groups that get involved are just looking to prevent pregnancy. We've got some pretty great ways to prevent pregnancy, actually, but not STDs and not the emotional and mental harm as well. So a few years back, we coined a new term in this movement, sexual risk avoidance. People had said abstinence doesn't work. Well, what part of abstinence doesn't work? I've heard people say it works every time, really. But really the approach. And there's a controversy over what really works to prevent the behaviors that put kids at risk. And we do a lot of research and look at a lot of research around the different approaches, what has really mattered. And there's been really a debate, a dialogue, misunderstanding and confusion in the media over what works. So abstinence only, abstinence based, abstinence plus, abstinence focused, it's all very confusing, and people use those terms differently. To me, it's all about the direction of instruction for children, giving a clear message to kids that the best thing they can do to protect their sexual health is to wait until marriage.
Now, one of the things that you and Dr. McElhaney and others have been a part of is a coalition for a new sexual revolution, because you recognize that we don't need to be looking at just what you're doing here in the state of Texas, because you have friends all over the country, all over our listening audience that can be part of that. So what does that mean? Because that's another aspect of something that you've coined a kind of a term and an organization, sort of unofficially, to begin to put together a coalition to speak this issue all over the country.
Well, I think when we look at our culture, there's truly a wave, continued growing wave from the first sexual revolution, where sexual messages, sexual pressure, sexual images, the culture is flooding our kids, pushing them to become sexually involved, normalizing sexual activity. when we look at things like the progression of gender identity and sexual orientation, when we look at the progression of pornography, a number of concerning issues really come back to that root of keeping sex within its intended context of healthy marriage. So we do have friends across the country that Dr. McElhaney has pulled together, and we're looking at really strategies to help change the culture on a bigger scale. Friends who are working on pornography, working on abortion, working on the sexual orientation and gender identity issues, all to get back to how can we really grow healthy children and healthy families by upholding a healthy marriage as the optimal context for sex.
Now, that kind of gets us also into some of the press releases here. One saying teaching non-abstinence birth control gets preliminary okay, but does not include gender identity, sexual orientation, because a lot of what was here had nothing to do with what we would think would be even the issue of sex education, but had a lot to do with trying to promote the LGBTQ agenda, wasn't it?
There was a lot of pressure really around two issues, the LGBTQ inclusive instruction, and then also this consent education, as we've talked about. And I can clarify on the LGBTQ issue that sexual risk avoidance, avoiding sexual risks, is for all children, that it is inclusive, absolutely. And we know that when we're writing standards for children in classrooms, especially elementary classrooms, even the adults are confused about terminology and language and expression and identity and orientation. All of those complicated concepts are best taught at home, where families can pass on their values to their children. So we kept differentiated instruction for those students, although it was demanded for and called for by many. Perhaps most disheartening to me was the young people saying, I identify as a gay or lesbian person, and I wish I had learned how to have sex in the way that I want to, and things like that, which were just so concerning the children. I saw a testimony this week of a 7-year-old who wanted information on being transsexual. So we decided that it was best for all students to avoid sexual risks, and we wrote inclusive health education TEKS for students.
I don't mean to be crass, but I saw something the other day where somebody said this third grader said that he wanted to change his sex, and he said, in the third grade, I was still kind of wondering what sand tastes like, I mean, we're talking about children at very young ages being encouraged to do things by adults or making decisions that they may regret for the rest of their life. So I want to take a break, but when we come back, I want to open up for questions that you might have, because after all, you may have been dealing with this in your own situation. Maybe you wonder what to say to your own kids. We haven't even gotten into the whole issue of pornography, sexting, and a variety of other things, which I know that you have addressed in the past as a speaker there at Aim for Success, now Just Say Yes. And so there are all sorts of other topics we want to put on the table. And of course, we haven't talked about contraception and condoms and all sorts of other things. So there's a lot more to cover, but I wanted to give you a chance. Maybe you've always wanted to ask a question of an expert. We have Lori Kuykendall with us today, and feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. We're talking about sex education in the public schools. We've been talking about this ever since Marlon Maddox started doing some of those interviews with Dr. McElhaney back in the 1980s. But the world has changed dramatically, and that's why we wanted to give you an update, and I think you'll have a chance to hear that. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Lori Kuykendall with the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. And how have you been able to respond to the argument that you hear all the time, and that is, well, this is great. You know, certainly some young people want to be taught how to abstain from sex. That's good. But how do you address the issue of, well, we shouldn't be teaching it in the schools at all? Because as I understand, there was at least some pushback from people saying we shouldn't be teaching that in the schools at all. How do you respond to that?
Absolutely. I thank you for bringing this up. We did have some who may be like-minded with you and I in a number of ways say this shouldn't be taught at school. It should be taught at home, in the family. And absolutely, families and parents should be the primary sex educator of their children. My background in health education upholds teaching children how to be healthy to help them do better in school also. So from that background, from a place of health and science, we've known that teaching children about health, which includes sexual health, age-appropriate, medically accurate, culturally relevant, all of those things in a way that impacts their lives, helps them do better in school. So I would say, yes, teach your children at home, please, and allow us to teach the kids at school who aren't getting this good information. And that's a lot of them. And so there are certainly lots of misinformation in our world. I think we have an opportunity in a school classroom to bring them life-giving truth in a way that, again, medically accurate, age-appropriate, and upholds many parents' value as well. Of course, in Texas and in most states, there's the right to opt your child out, opt out of classroom instruction.
Right.
And I think that should be upheld, and parents should have the right to not have their children participate in sex ed or any other kind of ed that they don't want their children being taught. But I think overall, we've came to such a good place of good health education standards for the kids in Texas that will affect kids all over the nation.
So I talked about one extreme. I don't want anything taught in the public schools. The other extreme is, oh, well, Lori, you're just naive. They're just going to be young kids that are going to get sexually involved anyway. So we need to teach them how to put on a condom. We have to teach them how to use contraception. We need to teach them all sorts of things. How do you respond to that?
Well, I appreciate the other side as well, right? There's kind of always a trick and a challenge here. I think part of it comes back to what is best for kids, and also really looking at sexual activity rates among young people. It is a myth, a fierce misconception that all kids are having sex. We even help the young people understand that. Most teenagers don't have sex. Centers for Disease Control verifies that in every state in the United States. So they track that, and as I shared earlier, that rate has been going down and down and down. Fewer kids are having sex on a national level as well. And we can talk about why and what they may be doing instead and some of those concerns, but most kids will wait. And the other part of that is, just like with academic standards, we uphold what's best for children. All kids go to college. All kids pass their grades. All kids are expected to do this, and this academically. And I think it's the same kind of unified, consistent messaging in health that should be upheld too. We don't teach them don't smoke and don't drink, but oh yeah, by the way, here's a filter if you want to not get as much nicotine in or whatever, on drugs and alcohol. If McDonald's wants to sell hamburgers, they don't say ours are great, but here's you might check out Burger King's also. I like to use that illustration because people say the abstinence but message is a good one. I say abstinence but is not clear. It's abstinence, sure, but go down the road and sex would be fine too. So I think we want to give a clear, consistent message, a primary prevention message, as the Centers for Disease Control calls it.
Yes. And again, I've seen some studies that have said, well, if they're using these devices, these are very effective. But then if you read the fine print, it's when they're used correctly and consistently. You have kids, I have kids. I can't think of my teenagers, and the words correctly and consistently fit very well with their behavior. So that's something to think about. But let's, before we go any further, take some phone calls. So we'll head out to California first. And let's see, I got to push the right button there, which is, I'm just learning this new system. There, Michael, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I may have missed some of this discussion. I'm a psychologist out here in Northern California, and several of us have tried to, kind of oppose some of the massive numbers of bills that the Democrats in Sacramento have been pushing, and to no avail. California Family Council even gave hundreds of what's her name, Schreier's book out.
Abigail Schreier, yes.
Yeah. And they don't. It doesn't seem to be make a dent. And I just wonder what Lori had to say about the political aspect of all of this.
Okay, Lori.
Well, one thing I like to say, we've been most successful keeping the argument in a public health perspective with health data from the Centers for Disease Control and other nationally recognized sources. As I like to say, take away politics, morals, and religion. Let's look at it from a health perspective. We also know when the elephants fight, the grass loses. And sometimes in all of that battle and all the discourse, there's just a lot of confusion that happens. And politics, morals, and religion play into it for sure. But can we come to the table of looking at from a health perspective? And then also a second strategy that has been effective is involving parents, and lots of them. We call it a tsunami strategy, where you get as many parents involved, and sometimes that's from church groups, scout groups, whoever groups there are. Many parents are simply sort of in the dark, aren't aware of the concerning kind of content being proposed. So know what's being taught, know every word, every slide, every video that your children will be taught. And when there are communities that are wanting to oppose a particular curriculum or particular laws, expose those kinds of dangerous messages and what they're really trying to teach children. A lot of people are just ignorant and need to be brought into light on what's being proposed and gathered with others to oppose it.
Let's, if we can, talk about what is available at the Medical Institute, because for Michael or other individuals, wherever they might be located around the country, that gets back to, I think, the genius that Dr. McElhaney brought to the focus, and that is to recognize that we don't have to even use religious arguments, political arguments. We can just use health arguments. And if you go to medinstitute.org, don't even have to remember all that, just simply go to Point of View and click on the picture next to Lori. You'll find, first of all, a lot of view-free materials that are available. And so you can find some of these various articles, some of the posts. There's a store that has some of this material. And I know that over the years, these infamous slides that Dr. McElhaney put together have been used even in our own context many times, just to help young people and adults and most importantly, school administrators recognize what is at stake. If you really had good, accurate information about the number of STTs, the kind of impact that this is having on young people, the life-changing impact that it's having on some, just the health issues alone coming from the CDC and others are enough to really make your case. And if at that point people are going to simply reject it, then you can use the line that's used against us all the time. Follow the science, because the science is really on one side, and that is to recognize the incredible danger to young people as they get sexually involved with one another.
Yes, and I was also thinking, Kerby, that we would need to look to us to help. That's what Medical Institute does. So we had calls come in recently from Utah, Vermont, New York. That's what we're about, is really what we call an influencer-focused leadership, helping the influencers, which it sounds like your caller and others may exactly be in that place where we could help parents and community activists have the information they need to go forward. We've got some good strategies along with the science that can help make a difference.
You know, I talked about young people. I know we're coming to a break, but I've said before, you have daughters, I have daughters, that young girls are even more vulnerable as a group than any other in terms of sexually transmitted diseases, aren't they?
They are, from a chemical, biological, physiological perspective. Also, they're more susceptible on some of the emotional and mental health issues as well, and they carry the greater burden with pregnancy. So we definitely want to uphold the value of girls and the value of waiting.
It's another slogan, don't protect the girls. We right now have the hashtag Me Too movement. We've had concerns about sexual predators and all the rest. Well, this is just one more issue to address there as well. Let's take a break, though. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, we have this press release that gives you kind of a summary of some of the things we've covered. But if you find yourself saying, I really want more information, I might even want to buy a book or two, well, those are also available at the website, and so we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you'd like to join the conversation, that number's 1-800-351-1212. We'll wind down our conversation today with Lori, but I just wanted you to be able to ask her a question or make a comment, so feel free to do so. Visit our website, pointofview.net. We have all the links that you need, and we'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back in a few more minutes. Lori Kuykendall with us, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head back out to California again. Shelley, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi.
What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, I love the idea of you protecting the girls. I love the movement idea. I'm kind of on the other side of the spectrum. I have an autistic son. He can be out of control sometimes. He's about 5'5" at age 11. He's going to be a big boy. So we always get birth control for girls. Why don't we do something like get a shot for the boys? Like, is there anything out there to give boys some kind of birth control? Because my son, I don't know what his future is going to be right now. But all I can say is I wish that there was some way that he can be having some birth control so I don't have to worry about his genetics. I had tested. He has something called a BBS10 gene. So if he ever decides to have kids, he needs to make sure that that girl does not have BBS10, or they're going to have babies that have weird toes. So I know there's things wrong with them. So I need to see if there's anything is going on for a boy to get some birth control shots.
Okay. Any thoughts about that? I don't know much about that.
Well, a couple of things we talk about a lot in this discourse is the difference between classroom instruction and counseling intervention, right? So much of what we've been talking about today is for a classroom environment where
Right.
you're teaching all children. And it sounds like this caller has specific needs that would be better dealt with in a clinical or counseling intervention kind of situation. I am aware of some beginnings of hormonal contraception for males that are out there, but I think it's, again, not such a simple answer either in terms of complexity of STDs and all of the other behavioral and emotional and mental health issues involved. So it would be tricky to answer in our environment today, but I think it raises a concern. I actually just heard last week some data looking at how autistic children are being sort of drafted into the
Yes.
transgender movement. They are susceptible to some of these ideas in terms of a new way to get attention or a new way to, you don't fit in that body, try this body kind of ideas. And I think that's something to be aware of too, and to continue to uphold truth and design and all of those. It's complex. I feel for this listener. And work with moms at our church that deal with special needs children. It is very hard. So I wouldn't want to try to give a simple answer by any means, but I think there's a number of issues to be dealt with there. And I appreciate the call.
We just talked about transgender a minute ago with Michael and Abigail Shire, who's been on the program and now has been blocked and all of that. But I've oftentimes said that people always say that a picture's worth 1,000 words. No, a graph is worth 1,000 words. And you've got a graph, if I remember right, that actually shows how there's been this explosion in transgender, but it isn't that there are more kids that are transgender. It is that there's social media that plants those ideas. And so you have this kind of rapid onset gender dysphoria that we were talking about with her. And in some respects, what we're dealing with now in terms of sex education is happening outside of the classroom. It's happening in the social media, isn't it?
The cultural messages are strong. That wave, that tide is pushing hard against our kids to mold them away from their true identity and to explore and try different things and be swept into different social identities, different communities. Families will take you in if you want to be different than what your family thinks you should be. It's really getting scary out there to me in a number of ways. I think we've got to continue to come back to science, as we've said before. And as you reference this chart we have that speaks to the tidal wave of social media that has kind of brought kids out to these identities. And we're beginning to see even in places like Europe where those that transition to another gender are now kind of coming back. I'm afraid we're in a time of social experiment where we really don't know what all the fallout of it will be. But I do hope we'll curb back to health and male and female and upholding what's best from a sexual and reproductive health perspective.
Yes, so transgender regret is something that's been talked about before. But one other aspect of social media, and I know you've spoken to this before, the availability of pornography, as well as sexting, and some of the things I know you've spoken about in some of these classrooms. This is just a much more difficult time for young people growing up, and a lot of that has been facilitated by these cell phones, hasn't it?
Yes, technology is both a tool for good and a tool for harm. And I think just like we train up our children to handle fire appropriately, which again can be for good or can be for harm, parents must be involved in helping technology be used for good. We can't throw it away. We can't keep kids off of devices, but we can help them make good and healthy decisions navigating this scary world and many pressures, lies, misinformation out there, and turn those for good.
Let's, if we can, talk about some of the resources that are available at your website, because you have all sorts of brochures and things of that nature, some about the brain. Matter of fact, I've said before to Dr. McElhaney, I learned so much more about brain studies, first from him. Of course, now we have all sorts of people doing studies on what is called neuroplasticity. His book on Hooked, Brain Science, on how casual sex affects human development. And you've got some very various videos and DVDs and a variety of others. So these are parents out there. In some cases, there may be teachers listening right now. There may be pastors saying, okay, I need all the information I can get. So what will they find when they land at the website?
Well, I would recommend they check out our brand new STI course. Really, it's an online, self-taught 2 to 3 hour time frame for you to really get the lowdown. The latest on sexually transmitted diseases would be my greatest recommendation, fresh and hot off the press. And then our brochures are on sale right now. We're selling them in packs of 50. Happy to let you take a look at those. And of course, our team, our science team, and myself are available as you all need input, speakers for certain events. Those kinds of things. We want to be a resource. We've testified at the Texas State Board of Education. We're happy to present at conferences, happy to help those who are testifying in their areas also.
I just mentioned, too, you have an HIV video in case anybody would want to watch that. But most importantly, on the lower right-hand corner, join our newsletter. So there's a way if people are saying, okay, I just need some kind of day-to-day information. Maybe I'm trying to figure out what I can say to my children or my grandchildren, or I'm wondering about what I can take to my school board, or I've got some real questions about what might be taught in these classes. That's a way in which they can kind of keep up to date with you, isn't it?
Absolutely. Newsletter just went out today, and if they sign up, I'd be happy to get them the one that went out today.
Well, very good. Before we wind down for the day, let's talk about that, because you also have a number of posts, some tweets. The featured video at the moment deals with this whole idea, isn't it just sex right? So, again, this would be something that you could say, maybe I'd like to forward that to my kids or my grandkids, or maybe the parents of kids that I know are there. So there's some resources that you could also use in a way to have an influence, isn't there?
Yes, we want to make it easy for parents to speak into this, for parents to know the great power they have over shaping their growing children's and adolescents' brains, especially as you've said. I think grandparents are really kind of at a loss of how can we save our kids, save in this scary world. And yet there absolutely is truth to be told and guidance and support to be given to help kids do well. And so I want to be about that. And then, of course, decision makers, whether that's in a school environment or a church environment, as you've recommended, we want to be a resource to help get this good information out. It's sort of squelched in the media sometimes, and we have a hard time getting the real story out there sometimes. So we need people on the ground to help us do that.
So again, if you'd like to contact Lori, you can go to medinstitute.org. Or, of course, they have a phone number there, and you can give them a call. And, of course, there's some great resources. And if nothing else, Medical Institute for Sexual Health has been around for a long time, and it's going to be around for a long time in the future. And that's because Lori's heading up some of the organization there. So thank you once again for coming into this program, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby. It's always a pleasure.
We do need to take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to focus on another topic that I think is going to be really helpful. So go to the website, pointofview.net, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation right here on Point of View.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and we are so glad that you could join us. Going to be talking about a lot of different things over the next couple of hours. Later this hour, we'll have Ron Hutchcraft in as we talk about hope when your heart is breaking. We thought, especially as we come to the end of a very difficult year, 2020, that we will talk about hope. Next hour, Chuck Bentley will be with us and get a little bit of a look at what has happened here in 2020. Also, a very good piece on how to manage your finances for 2021. I'm sure he'll have some comments about some of the things happening in Congress. And of course, as I've mentioned, we are coming to the last 2 days of 2020, and we hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry. I've been very encouraged by some of the gifts that have come in. We're still kind of running behind from where we were last year, but again, we recognize many of you have had some financial challenges, and if you are one of those individuals, let us at least pray for you, and thank you for considering us and praying for us. But for those of you that might be able to help, certainly want to encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net, or you can call the pledge line number 800-347-5151. Okay, next Wednesday, a week from today, it looks like it's on, because Senator Josh Hawley has said that he is concerned about election integrity, and he will indeed object on January 6th. If you've not been keeping track, there are at least a dozen people that I can already count that are individuals in the House of Representatives that said that they would object. And many of those in the state of Texas, including, of course, we mentioned Louis Gohmert's lawsuit yesterday. But the big question mark has been, is there at least one individual or more in the United States Senate? And Josh Hawley, the representative, actually the senator from Missouri, said this today in his statement. Following both the 2004 and 2016 elections, Democrats in Congress objected during the certification of electoral votes in order to raise concerns about election integrity. They were praised by Democratic leadership and the media when they did, and they were entitled to do so. But now those of us concerned about the integrity of this election are entitled to do the same. Thought it was kind of good to put that in some context, by the way, because almost all the challenges up till now have been from the Democrats. Some of those go all the way back to Richard Nixon. Some of them go to, of course, George W. Bush and Donald Trump. But in each case, 3 different cases, 2 which actually resulted in splitting the House and Senate to actually have an up or down vote. 2016 was kind of shut down, if you will, by the vice president at that time, Joe Biden. But nevertheless, let's put this in perspective. 3 times Democrats have protested. So is it fair for the Republicans to do so? Oh, you're going to hear all sorts of hue and cry. But he goes on to say, I cannot vote to certify the Electoral College results on January 6th without raising the fact that some states, particularly, he mentions Pennsylvania, failed to follow their own state election laws, and I cannot vote to certify without pointing out the unprecedented effort of mega corporations including Facebook and Twitter, to interfere in this election in support of Joe Biden. At the very least, Congress should investigate allegations of voter fraud and adopt measures to secure the integrity of our elections, but Congress so far has failed to act. For these reasons, I will follow the same practice Democrat members of Congress have in years past, object during the certification process on January 6th to raise these critical issues. That is what has been posted by Senator Josh Hawley. I think there may be some others that will step forward. We will see. And if nothing else, it gives us a lot to talk about tomorrow. Penna Dexter will be in studio with us. Kelly Shackelford will be in studio with us. We'll talk about what that might mean. Whether it goes anywhere is another big question, but it's certainly, I think, calling attention to the fact that there are just a lot of Americans, very high percentage of Republicans, and even a percentage of independents and Democrats that say, we're just not sure about this election. And even if we can't overturn this one, which I think is going to be a very significant uphill climb, at least let's make sure we are able to have some confidence in election and voter integrity in the future. So that gives you an idea of what is going on right now. While we're talking about the Senate, let me just mention that I think the push for a $2,000 COVID-19 relief check is, at least at the moment, dead. Donald Trump wanted it. He was able to get Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives to vote for it. Has not been able to get Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to vote for it, who instead offered that if we do indeed have a $2,000 check, we need to add a number of things to it as well, which are, I think, going to be a deal breaker for most of the people in the Democratic side of the aisle in the Senate. And so for now, it looks like $2,000 is not going to be the amount that will be given to the American taxpayers, only $600. But, you know, anything can change next week. But then we start moving into a new session of Congress, and we'll see what they do at that point. Another point that I thought I might make is something that's even more intriguing, and that is when Congress convenes on the 3rd, was it the 3rd? I guess it's be the 4th of January, although I've heard some people talking about the 3rd, so I'm not sure. I guess it is, yes, there is going to be a vote for the Speaker of the House on January 3rd. I take that back. The actual business takes place on the 4th. Some people are suggesting that this vote on January 3rd for Speaker of the House is not a done deal for Nancy Pelosi. And the reason for that is that you have had about a dozen different Democrat seats that were lost and thus taken by Republicans. You have a couple of other Democratic members that are going to theoretically leave to actually be in the Biden administration. And now, if that's not more difficult enough, you have at least 3 Democratic members from Pennsylvania, Maine, and Michigan that really are not so sure to support Nancy Pelosi. So when you have the House get together and vote for the Senate, for the Speaker of the House, I should say, it's at least theoretically possible that she would not be elected. Now, what would happen? I mean, some people are suggesting that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California could sneak in and win the spot. Don't necessarily see that, but it, I think, just once again strikes everybody as a great illustration of how, interestingly, some of the things that have been pretty much given in the House of Representatives are not. And, of course, when the House of Representatives meets next week, this is going to be kind of interesting because they could also change the rules on the counting of the Electoral College votes and thus prevent the opportunity for Mo Brooks and Josh Hawley to raise some questions. So we'll see whether that plays itself out as well. But if nothing else, the amount of intrigue that is surrounding the House of Representatives is amazing. And it, if nothing else, is, I think, one more reason why I hope you'll be listening to Point of View, because I'd like to believe the mainstream press would cover this fairly and accurately, but I haven't seen any evidence of it in the last couple of months, and so that's why we're going to at least try to tell you the rest of that story. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19 for just a minute. Then thought I'd spend just a moment talking about these pardons by President Trump and some of the controversy surrounding those. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As this year winds down, many Americans focus on year-end giving. There is abundant evidence that charitable giving has been affected by our newly revised tax code that rewards fewer taxpayers with tax benefits. Howard Husek wrote about this earlier this month when many Americans took advantage of Giving Tuesday. His observations then are even more relevant at the end of December. Indiana University School of Philanthropy have been able to document two significant trends. While overall giving has slightly climbed, individual giving has declined. Actually, when you adjust for inflation, then giving by individuals declined even more. The major reason is the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which raised the standard deduction for federal income tax returns for a larger percentage of taxpayers. In the past, many of these taxpayers would itemize their charitable deductions. Now they no longer qualify for a charitable tax deduction. The Tax Policy Center acknowledges that most low and moderate income taxpayers do not claim a deduction for charitable contributions, largely because most of them do not itemize. The 90% of households that do not itemize make at least 40% of all charitable contributions. The remaining 10% that do itemize account for 60% of charitable contributions. I suspect that a significant percentage of those who don't itemize but do make charitable contributions are Christians who do so because they believe they should give to their church and Christian organizations. Some have suggested a future tax code revision providing for charitable giving tax credit or some other incentive. Of course, these proposals won't even be considered if we continue to elect to Congress representatives that try to find more and more ways to spend and continue to run up massive federal deficits. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I would urge anybody who listens to Point of View to understand that unless you are willing to pay something, you can think of it as your tithe as far as I'm concerned, pay something because this is ministry. Point of View it's important, it's entertaining, it's vibrant. I hope that folks who listen already know that, and I'm just here to remind them that they should think about supporting it. But I think this is an important ministry. Kerby Anderson is doing the Lord's work, and I would encourage you to step up to the plate. They need your help.
And encouragement from Eric Metaxas. And again, we encourage you to think about what you might want to do to support this ministry. We're down to the last 2 days, and we would love to hear from you. You can go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, the number to call, and there'll be somebody there to answer your phone call, 800-347-5151. You know, just a minute ago, I was talking about Congress, and there was an incoming member of Congress that will not make it. His name is Luke Letlow. Many of you in Louisiana probably know his story. He was the congressman-elect, age 41. and yet died of COVID. And I think it illustrates, again, a couple of things. First of all, our vulnerability. First of all, the fragility of life. I have started kind of making a list of individuals over this last few years that we've interviewed on Point of View that have died from COVID. And as the point out there from LSU's Health Center, this is an individual of all of age 41, was going to be elected and was elected for Congress and was going to then sit on the various congressional committees at a very, I'd have to say, relatively young age, had no underlying conditions, and died of COVID. And there are a lot of people that have, I think, sometimes said to themselves, maybe I would just be better if I just got the coronavirus and then develop the antibodies, get over with, and get on with my life. And some are sort of saying, I'm just delaying the inevitable. Sooner or later, I'm going to get it. Yeah, but none of us know beforehand how our bodies are going to respond to the infection. And this individual who was in Monroe, Louisiana, just wanted to mention, those of you that are in Louisiana, you know the story, but for the rest of our people listening around the country, here's an example of somebody who just simply died because of COVID, which brings me to the flip side of that, because both of these are equally true. On the one hand, we do have people that even seem like they should not have died from COVID. But then we also have another concern that now comes from our friends in Minnesota, because you have two state lawmakers up there that are calling for their state and really calling for the country to go back and do an audit of the number of deaths that are attributed to COVID-19. We've talked about this before. Did you die because of COVID-19 or did you die with COVID-19? And Representative Mary Franson and State Senator Scott Jensen, who, by the way, is a physician, and that's important in just a minute because he talks about this, have been able to, identify cases very easily, cases which we've talked about on this program too, which have been listed as COVID deaths that are not. They said, for example, we have an individual dying because of a fall, but because that individual had COVID, well, it's listed as a COVID death. They have an example of a freshwater drowning. It was listed as COVID death. We have a person eventually dying of dementia, or we have a stroke, a multi-organ failure. And, of course, the one I mentioned just the other day, a person who was ejected from a car in a car accident, but that was counted as a COVID death because he had the virus in his system. And so the point that especially Dr. Scott Jensen was making is, he said, I really got myself on hot water back in April because I made a comment that as a physician being encouraged to do death certificately different with COVID-19 than with other disease entities. And he points out that the CDC has a document and guides physicians on how to do death certificates, but they changed all of that if COVID-19 was involved. And he then, of course, later on even points out that there is a fairly significant payout to a hospital for a COVID death, which he was estimating was an average payout of about $77,000. So these are both equally true. I know sometimes people can't keep two things in the head at the same time, but one of those is, yes, there are still people dying of COVID for no underlying health reason whatsoever that I think illustrate, again, our vulnerability. And on the other hand, I think there's good evidence, as we've mentioned on more than one occasion, that some of the COVID-19 deaths have been inflated. And I think we should have an audit. There's nothing wrong with having an audit. That gives us more accurate numbers. And I think it should be considered there as well. Just before we take a break, though, I did mention the pardons. That is something we hardly ever have talked about here on Point of View, but it came to my attention when you had a reporter talking with a federal judge in Iowa, Robert Platt. And he is actually now on senior status. We've talked about that before with Kelly Shackelford. So he's not necessarily doing cases every day. But in some respects, because he's old enough to probably retire, he's able to say some things that he probably would never have said if he was sitting on the bench every day. But nevertheless, Judge Robert Platt said, It's not surprising that a criminal like Donald Trump pardons other criminals, but apparently to get a pardon, one has to be either a Republican, a convicted child murderer, or a turkey. Now, you can talk about some of the pardons that have come down. I think the biggest controversy lately have been some of the pardons that Donald Trump has given to, in particular, 4 contractors with Blackwater who were accused of actually killing civilians, unarmed Iraqi civilians. And whether that pardon is justifiable, and I don't think it is an illustration of this chronic problem that we've had by the fact that we do allow the President of the United States to pardon individuals. You might say, why? Well, that's Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution that says the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So the president is given a chance to grant a reprieve or a pardon. And this particular judge is really upset with us, Robert Platt. But again, I think, can we at least put some of this in perspective? Because Robert Platt was appointed to the bench by Bill Clinton. If there has ever been a president in modern times that I think has abused the pardon provision in the Constitution, I think almost all of us around the table, and we even talked about it back in the 1990s, would be Bill Clinton. For the record, President Bill Clinton granted pardons and clemency to 456 people, which I think is still a record, although Donald Trump's getting close. Matter of fact, he pardoned 140 people on the final hours of his presidency. And if you want to see all those, I found a Wikipedia site which points out that just before he actually turned over the office to George W. Bush, he pardoned 140 people, including Roger Clinton, which was one of the family members, about cocaine and everything else. Nevertheless, I'm sure that Robert Platt, even though he was appointed by Bill Clinton, probably never criticized Bill Clinton for his pardons, but nevertheless, of course, is very critical of Donald Trump for his pardons. And you have to go back and say, maybe some of the questions being raised at the ratifying convention were relevant. Back in 1788, you have George Mason, who rose and really had a question about whether or not we should grant to the president the power of pardon, because he was concerned that the power of pardoning could allow him maybe in some cases to pardon individuals in a crime that he was participating in, which is why you have that interesting little disclaimer that the president has the power to grant reprieves and pardons except in cases of impeachment. So this was added later on by James Madison. But I've always been a little bit uneasy about this idea of a pardon because it sounds like a king. We don't have a monarchy, and as much as we like some of the pardons, Dinesh D'Souza comes to mind, and a variety of others that you can mention, individuals that have been unduly prosecuted because they were connected to Donald Trump, people that were unduly prosecuted because they had a low-level drug offense, but then found themselves in life, sentences and things like that. As much as we like the fact that sometimes people probably deserved a pardon, at the same time, I think we're getting to the point where some of these pardons, whether under Bill Clinton, whether under Donald Trump, I've, of course, skipped over an obvious one, some of the ones that were also controversial about Barack Obama, it would be helpful, although it's unlikely, that maybe we could come up with some way in which Congress could have some oversight over these pardons. But nevertheless, I did want to at least acknowledge that these pardons are controversial, and at least one judge is convinced that it was inappropriate for some of these pardons to come from Donald Trump. We'll be right back.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, as we come to the last few days of 2020, we recognize that some of you are able to financially support this ministry. We've been talking about that because we certainly do need your financial support. But you've heard me on a number of occasions talk about the fact that I know that many of you have faced very significant loss. And what do we do when we have lost a loved one, when we've lost a job, when we have lost our health? And I thought that this would be a book that would be very encouraging for you. It is going to come out next week in January, and so we wanted to give you kind of a preview because it really was developed by Ron Hutchcraft, who is an individual I've known in some of the work I've done through Moody Broadcasting. Of course, I think many of you know him through the Ron Hutchcraft Ministries, a speaker, evangelist, author, and radio personality, but also an individual who lost his wife, Karen, and that caused him to kind of go through a process of journaling and then really to begin to think about more than just the loss of a spouse, but job loss, a loss of dreams, broken relationships, maybe a loss of health. And so this is why we wanted to feature now for about a half an hour this book, Hope When Your Heart is Breaking. It is published by Harvest House, about 180 pages broken into two sections, The Flag Over the Rubble and Challenging Life's Hope Robbers. And if you're not familiar with Ron Hutchcraft, we've mentioned his name here before, an individual that also with his wife was the co-founder of On Eagle's Wings, which is an outreach and leadership program for Native American and First Nations young people. You might also know him as the co-founder of the Warrior Leadership Summit, and of course an individual that many of us have heard on radio over the years. And so Ron Hutchcraft, welcome to Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby. You go through all of that, I'm worn out.
Yeah, and, it's been a while since you've written a book, from what I remember, and so in some respects, because of the loss of your sweet wife Karen, who I think, if I remember right, didn't I read someplace where you had known her since age 19? So when you've spent a half a century with an individual, and then you come in and look at the recliner and she's not there anymore. You, of course, had a devastating loss, but you've used this to really begin to help minister to our listeners who are struggling with all different kinds of losses here in 2020.
Well, Kerby, first of all, I just want to thank you. I know this is a little departure maybe from the normal, agenda. You've got some important issues you cover, but thank you for realizing, where a lot of listeners are right now. I think not just my broken heart. There's a lot of broken hearts out there, and you went over a lot of the losses that have taken place. I had no idea when this book came out that that our country, virtually everyone listening, has probably lost something. If nothing else, we've lost certainty. We've lost our ability to plan. All kinds of things. Well, thank you for this. And, it's interesting that you just described what was the best day of my wife's life and the worst day of mine. Mm-hmm. Let me just take you back to the day this book was born, and I never intended to write a book about this, and certainly I didn't know a book was being born. But May 15th, 2016 was a fabulous day. Our grandson was graduating from high school, valedictorian, gave a wonderful Christ-honoring speech to a stadium full of people. I had to leave to go speak. Some guys were going to drive me through the night to get there, and I said, we're sitting in the bleachers, and I said, I love you, honey, and this is the love of my life since I was 19. You're right. And she said, well, I love you. And then she teared up a little, and we've had a lot of goodbyes. So I'm kind of struck by that. I said, honey, what's going on? And she said, I'm really going to miss you. And I said, oh, no. I said, well, don't worry. It's not going to be long. I was very wrong. The next day I got a call from my son, and in an instant, basically, the love of my life was gone to heaven. Best day of her life, worst day of my life, and suddenly I was in a valley that I have traveled with many people in my lifetime, but never have I been in this deep valley, never before and never again will my heart be broken like it was then. In fact, I wrote a blog a couple weeks later when I could finally write something, and it simply was titled, My Shattered Heart, My Certain Hope. And that was really the story summed up pretty well. Kerby, I felt like a lost little boy. it was always Ron and Karen, like one word, and in an instant it was Ron. And I was so excited for her in heaven. She was in heaven, but I wasn't, and her kids weren't, and her grandkids weren't. And so with a shattered heart, I cried out to God, and I know that there are many people, whatever their loss, how it may not have been quite that deep, but I know when there's loss, obviously that triggers grief. And when you have loss and grief, you're at a crossroads. And I realized very deeply that then come the choices. And there are two roads you can take after a loss. You know, it's kind of like a hammer. You know, you hold a hammer in your hand. Now, does a hammer build or does a hammer destroy? Well, this is an easy, yes, it does. In my hands, it'll probably destroy, but it doesn't depend on the hammer. The hammer doesn't decide that. No, it's what you do with the hammer that decides whether it builds or destroys. And Kerby, that's exactly what I had to face, that it will be choices that I make. I had no choice about getting hit by the hammer. This was a sledgehammer. Some lady listening, you didn't have any choice about the loss. But now we have the choice of what we're going to do with it. And that will determine whether by our own choices we inadvertently compound the hurt, extend the grief, and actually forfeit hope, or whether we go on a road to hope and healing. And you're right. I heard you say that, and I appreciate you bringing up that I started to write in a journal. God must have just prompted me to do that. I found a little notebook of Karen's, started to write in it, and I wrote these words. If you could see it, there's a page that's at the top, it's big bold letters. I will not waste this grief. Now, I've now come to call that defiant hope, but I didn't have a word for it. I don't even know where the thought came from except from God. But I wrote there, Lord, if it's going to hurt this bad, would you please use it somehow to make me more useful to you and more helpful to other people? And all I can tell you is the months and the years since then have been the answer to that prayer. And out of that has come a book which is really a practical manual for the crossroads that follow loss and grief.
Let me just mention that Ron Hutchcraft is with us, so we have a link to his Facebook page, his Twitter feed, his webpage. Also, you can go to hopewhenyourheartisbreaking.com, find out about the book. We also have a place where you can pre-order the book, both in paperback and Kindle. It's coming out next week, first week in January, so we wanted to give you an advanced look. And you've been talking about, of course, the flag over the rubble, which is the first section. I might also mention just a veritable who's who of individuals that we've known and interviewed on this program over the years that actually endorse your book, and a foreword by Johnny Erickson Tata, which I thought was very well written as well. But as they go to hopewhenyourheartisbreaking.com, they can find out not only more about the book, but I want to encourage some of our listeners to go and watch the video. It's about 3 minutes long in which you explain the video, and then there's a share button so they could actually put it on their Facebook page or Twitter, educate themselves, other people about this book, because guess what? We all know people that have been struggling during this year of 2020, don't we?
It's interesting. We've had some advanced copies of the book because I knew the author, and they were. What's interesting is that they're the people who are reading it invariably are telling me, a friend of mine just said, can I have 7 copies of the book right away?
Oh, yes.
He told me the list of the people who have had losses, and everybody's thinking of somebody to give it to. Well, to me, this isn't about, books that are getting out there. This is about lives that are at a critical point, and I know so vividly that the choices they make, and we can talk about what some of those are, both the hurt ones and the hope ones, but those choices are going to set the course for so much of the rest of their life. I want them to choose the hope road.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let me take a break because we have one of those mandatory breaks coming up. And I might just mention, this is a book you're going to want to get for yourself. You're going to want to order multiple copies. I'm guaranteeing that. But you want to pass those on to others. But one of the things I love is near the end of the book, you also have a comment. If you would want to know more about a personal relationship with Jesus, life's one unlosable love, visit chataboutjesus.com. And that is, I think, another thing that I would encourage you to consider. You may know some individuals that have not necessarily been open to the gospel. They may have resisted you trying to share your faith with them. They have maybe been the kind that shake their fist at a God they don't believe in, or whatever it might be. This might be just another one of those open opportunities. And as Ron Hutchcraft said, let's not have this grief go to waste. So we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the choices. Unfortunately, I meet sometimes people that get stuck in their grief. They don't know how to get out of it. And Ron's going to have some advice about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Point of View is a part of my daily life, and I know of no other radio program that helps its listeners to develop, articulate, and then defend a biblical worldview as successfully as yours does. For those reasons, I consider it an honor to be able to support Point of View financially, and I would encourage all of your listeners, both young and old, to prayerfully consider doing the same.
Again, some comments from some of our listeners that appreciate Point of View. And as we come to year end, we hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry. If nothing else, as you're having a chance to hear about a book that is coming out next week, it'll be available next week. Hope When Your Heart is Breaking. Ron Hutchcraft is the author. Forward by John Erickson Tata. Endorsements by all sorts of individuals that we we interview here on Point of View, like Josh McDowell and Jerry Jenkins and Erwin Lutzer and Jim Cymbala and Nick Hall and June Hunt and Crawford Laritz and Robert Wogemuth and Chris Fabry, as well as Janet Parshall, Joe Battaglia, Bob Lepine, Grant Skeldon, and others. And so, again, it is a book that is coming out. I think it will give you a lot of great hope. It is something that you will probably want to get multiple copies of. And if you go to hopewhenyourheartisbreaking.com, you can, of course, see the video there. You can also listen to some of the previous interviews that we've seen Ron Hutchcraft do. But Ron, let's, if we can, just give people a sense of the overview, because in the second section of your book, you have chapters on when your heart is broken, when your love is broken, when your dream is broken, when your health is broken, when your past is broken. I don't want people to think that this would be just a book I would give to somebody who's lost a husband or wife, although it certainly is. It is the book that is written in such a way to really help people that are devastated by some health reversal, some job loss, maybe a spouse loss or a child loss, to begin to find hope in the midst of tremendous devastation.
You know, I had some wonderful, loving friends who sent me books, you know, during the time of my loss with Karen. And you know, and they were helpful and they were great, but they really, as you said, they focused on the funeral kind of loss. You know, the fact is, there's a lot of things that die in our life. I mean, marriages. Somebody's listening as they feel like their marriage is dying or died. You know, go to the doctor and you feel like my life will never be the same. You went in okay and you came out with awfully bad news. Mm-hmm. And you know, you have a dream for your kids or for your business or whatever. And a lot of people have lost dreams this year. Maybe your past, as you alluded to, that there was abuse or there was neglect or abandonment, some kind of wounding earlier, and you keep re-grieving it because it's never really been dealt with. And so those are all I call hope robbers. And when one of the hope robbers hits you, one of life's hammers, you know, here's where probably the single greatest mistake you can make is to stuff it and not grieve it. And I would tell you that this is probably the single most common response to grief.
Of course.
Is that it hurts so bad that there's some form of burying it. And you mentioned our work with Native Americans, and there and throughout my life, I have seen the damage that ungrieved grief can do. Because grief, when it is buried, doesn't really die or go away. It grows and morphs into ugly things: anger, hard heart, bitterness toward God, a negative spirit, isolation, loneliness. And so, in fact, Shakespeare said, he said it pretty simply, give sorrow words. I think the first place I did that was in a journal. I had to get it out of me. If you cannot just internalize grief. It's ugly inside. And so let it out, talk to somebody. In fact, if you can share your journey and go, there are a lot of grief share groups across the country. They're all over the place. One of them helped my daughter greatly in losing her mother here. And then I know I've just talked to somebody just yesterday who made the mistake of they lost somebody dear to them, and they went to what I would call temporary pain relief. And a lot of people try to get pain relief. They say, well, I'll stop hurting if I drink or if I drug or if I have a relationship with somebody or if some form or another, I run from it. Well, the fact is that then what you're going to have is that problem. Now you've not only got a grief problem, but now you have the problem created by the
addictions. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're addicted to something that's negative. Withdrawing from people. I just talked to somebody who had a good friend committed suicide, and he said, I made the mistake of going in and withdrawing from everybody. And when you do, you've sentenced yourself to Lonely Island. We were never meant to handle these things alone. You let your heart turn hard. You run from God instead of running to Him. The only one who could make any sense out of this, the only one who has any hope to give you beyond this hurt, don't run from Him. Run to Him. So there's a lot of, that's what I call the choices that lead to more hurt. But if you will grieve your grief, open your heart. Don't close it up around the grief. Share the journey. And if you have lost someone who people knew Jesus more than mourn. Now, I didn't say don't mourn. The difference with Jesus, I should make this clear. What is the difference with Jesus or without when you've got some major loss in your life? Well, I liken it. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians, talking to people who had lost people they loved, he said, "We do not grieve." Now, if it stopped there and there was a period, Kirby, I'd put my Bible away, maybe I never open it again. I go, that's a lie. We do grieve. It says we do not grieve as others who have no hope.
Yes, those without no hope.
Oh, yeah. So without Jesus, you've just got the grief. And so it's like a scale that's just, boom, all down on one side. But you got Jesus on the other side. If you belong to him, there is someone who heals hearts, who brings love and healing and hope and perspective and a future to you. So you don't deny your grief, but you don't have to be defined by your loss the rest of your life. Some people are still defined by what they've lost. But if you'll open up to Jesus, and that's what I did, because here's the deal. A broken heart is an open heart.
Yes.
It is wide open. Mine was open in places I never knew I had places there. And if you will admit Jesus into those places in your heart where he's never gone because you've never really opened it up to him, you didn't even know to, I will tell you that there will be an intimacy of a connection with the Son of God that is unlike anything you've ever experienced before. And I've lived my whole life with this Jesus.
Very good.
But all I can tell you is that there is something deeper and closer, more real, more intimate, more moment by moment than I've ever had before. He also opened my heart to other hearts more than ever before. I don't think I've ever been a hard-hearted guy.
It just opens your heart. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate to bring up the Grinch. That's kind of stupid in the midst of all this, but no, it's not. Because at the end of The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, he stole the Christmas presents from the Who.
His heart grows, yeah.
Yeah, you got it. He said, my heart grew 3 sizes. My heart grew 3. I hope I wasn't a Grinch, but, man, my heart has grown 3 sizes. And
Incredible.
Now, somebody today, I don't care how long my list is. I used to let my list decide. But, man, somebody's lost somebody or had a major hurt in their life, I'm probably going to stop for them more than I ever have before. So these are the choices.
Sure.
You start to give hope to other people.
That's right.
What?
Again, the book is A Pathway to Hope, a roadmap through pain of grief and loss. And we wanted you to know about it because the book's coming out next week. And maybe we can schedule another time in the future when people had a chance to read the book and share their stories and everything. But I wanted to give you a great opportunity to let people know that they can be looking for it in their local bookstore or they can order it. So, Ron Hutchcraft, Happy New Year. And thank you so very much for writing the book. And thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kirby. You're a good friend. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Chuck Bentley is going to be with us. We're going to look ahead, but also look behind on some of the financial issues. And don't forget that you can support this ministry. Visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on this hour of Point of View. And let me just mention real quickly that we are supposed to be talking with Chuck Bentley. We'll see if we can connect up with him. But great opportunity for me just at the top of this hour to mention again, we're coming down to the last 2 days of 2020. And if you can help us out financially, we would greatly appreciate it. We're running a little bit behind from where we've been in the past, but I am so appreciative of those individuals like yourself, if you are one of those that have given to this ministry. So I wanted to say thank you. And we were going to spend some time, and may still be able to do so, with Chuck Bentley talking about one of the articles I've posted, 5 Steps to Improve Your Finances This New Year. And it is very well written, as of course so much of the material at Crown Financial Ministries is. It's the largest Christian financial ministry in the world, founded originally by Larry Burkett. And if you find yourself saying, you know, this has been a hard year financially, it would be good maybe to get some of that information. Years ago, I wrote a book about your finances in the midst of a crisis, and that crisis back then was in 2008 and 2009 with the downturn in the economy. Maybe I should dust off some of the material in that book and make it available as well. But just while we're talking finances for just a minute, let me just mention that it has been interesting. This article came out yesterday in which it pointed out that not everybody has done poorly. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have done very well. Those would be the billionaires. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos' fortunes and others grew by 600 billion pounds. That'd be about $800 billion, or almost $1 trillion. As a matter of fact, if you look at all of those 614 billionaires in America, their bank balances have increased by a mega $351 billion since the virus first took hold. So let's recognize that in some respects, as I have in a commentary coming out next week, that what has happened with these lockdowns is it has actually intensified, if nothing else, the gap between the rich and the poor. The rich have done very well. Let's take, for example, Jeff Bezos, who may be the richest person on this planet. Jeff Bezos makes $321 million a day. Okay, Amazon does, but he owns it, okay? Think about this, $321 million a day. Put it a different way. Jeff Bezos could say, you know, tomorrow I won't take any of the profits. I will just take those profits and distribute them to people in America. I will send $1 million to 321 million people in America. Does that give you an idea of what this is like? Could you do well if you had a check from Jeff Bezos for $1 million? I recognize it's a few more than 321 million, but pretty close. Or if you just sent it just to adults, could you do with $1 million? Well, he's making that $321 million every single day. By the way, the people who work for Amazon make about $35,000 a year. That's median salary. So let's be very honest that when people talk about income inequality, the thing that has perhaps created the greatest amount of income inequality have been some of these lockdowns, the pandemic, and the rest. So Google's doing fine. Microsoft is doing fine. Facebook is doing fine. Amazon is doing fine. And that's an understatement. But in the midst of that, sometimes people want to give back. So let's give some credit where credit is due. I came across this the other day. I think Jim Dennison first wrote about it. And that is the opportunity to have an impact on 8,000 people. And this came from Dave Ramsey. If you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, of course, he's written a number of books about finances and things of that nature. And, of course, has been a #1 best-selling author for many years. But he decided that what he was going to do is really try to help some individuals. Now, from the counseling he's been doing, he's been helping people regain control of their money. But he also has said, I've always told my team that we are blessed for one reason, and that so we can be a blessing to others. So are you ready for this? His company bought medical and car debt totaling $10 million from 2 private debt collection companies and completely forgave the debt that these people had for cars and medical debt. And so as a result, then, he had the people that work with him, which are called Ramsey Solutions, the team members, to then go and make phone calls and deliver the good news. And so can you imagine that if you had massive medical debt, and right now, I'm not far from individuals that I know are dealing with that kind of massive medical debt. I know even some of the debt been dealing with, even with my own daughter, but I won't go into that detail as well, that just think about what that was. And so then, if nothing else, Dave Ramsey really answered the question some people were probably asking anyway, because he said, why the heck would anyone scoop up $10 million worth of debt and pay it off just like that? Well, here was his explanation. The answer is simple: to show the love of Jesus Christ. You see, this whole completely forgiving a debt thing has been done before by him. No other gift could compare to that one, but we felt that this was one small way we could continue to pass on that love. So if nothing else, I hope you really enjoyed that story. It's a great story, and don't really know Dave Ramsey. He has his own radio program, so I've really never had the opportunity to interview him. Certainly know about him, and yet I can't be any more impressed that he was able to put together $10 million, which probably tells you a lot about how much money may be available through the company and through others that maybe helped him do that. But to actually help individuals who were being hounded by debt collection companies and to forgive their car debt, their medical debt, and other kinds of debt. Pretty amazing story. And if nothing else, illustrates only so well the kind of positive things each one of us can do. You can't give away $10 million, but you could give away $50, $100 to somebody in need. And I would hope as we even are coming to year end that you'll think about, first of all, supporting your church. Second of all, if you're listening to a radio program or a radio station that maybe raises funds, some use commercials, but if they have fundraising, certainly support them. And then number 3, I hope you can support us as well, because we certainly are dependent upon your financial gifts. But kudos to Dave Ramsey. And so even though I didn't get Chuck Bentley on here, I thought maybe I'd tell you another financial story. And if nothing else, we have the piece that we've posted here, 5 steps to improve your finances this year. Number 1, vow to make, or first of all, make a vow. Second of all, make a plan. Number 3, make a target. Number 4, make a budget. Number 5, review your insurance. And so he really helps you think through these. Of course, each one of these have whole paragraphs beneath them to help you begin to think about what you're going to do. And if you really have found that 2020 has not been a good year for you, and I suspect it has not, for so many on the listening audience, and you want to maybe figure out what you can do better in 2021, that's why we posted this very good piece from Crown Financial. And when we come back, we'll move on. We have lots of other topics to address, and so I'm going to spend some time working our way through those, and most importantly, encouraging your phone calls. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As this year winds down, many Americans focus on year-end giving. There is abundant evidence that charitable giving has been affected by our newly revised tax code that rewards fewer taxpayers with tax benefits. Howard Husek wrote about this earlier this month when many Americans took advantage of Giving Tuesday. His observations then are even more relevant at the end of December. Indiana University School of Philanthropy have been able to document two significant trends. While overall giving has slightly climbed, individual giving has declined. Actually, when you adjust for inflation, then giving by individuals declined even more. The major reason is the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which raised the standard deduction for federal income tax returns for a larger percentage of taxpayers. In the past, many of these taxpayers would itemize their charitable deductions. Now they no longer qualify for a charitable tax deduction. The Tax Policy Center acknowledges that most low and moderate income taxpayers do not claim a deduction for charitable contributions, largely because most of them do not itemize. The 90% of households that do not itemize make at least 40% of all charitable contributions. The remaining 10% that do itemize account for 60% of charitable contributions. I suspect that a significant percentage of those who don't itemize but do make charitable contributions are Christians who do so because they believe they should give to their church and Christian organizations. Some have suggested a future tax code revision providing for charitable giving tax credit or some other incentive. Of course, these proposals won't even be considered if we continue to elect to Congress representatives that try to find more and more ways to spend and continue to run up massive federal deficits. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Over the years that I've been involved in ministry as a pastor, as a seminary professor, and now in what we do, it was at one point difficult for me to ask people to support a ministry financially. I kind of had this idea that I was asking something from them, that it was in some sense a favor they're doing for me or whatnot. Over the years, I've come to understand, if you find something God's in, then giving them an opportunity to invest in that is a privilege. Giving somebody a chance to join God at work, to give a gift that is going to be used literally to change lives and souls and to literally make a difference all around the world is a privilege. I want to be part of something like that. I want my life to count. I want to leave a legacy. I want to do something that matters. Point of view matters. Every day it matters. You're speaking the truth in love. You're speaking God's word, and it never returns void. And our listeners have an opportunity to invest in eternal difference if they'll do this.
Some kind comments from Jim Dennison, who was with us on Monday. And again, just reminding you that if you would want to support this ministry, we're coming down to the last 2 days. And so, again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and that is a way in which you can support this ministry. Of course, the pledge line, 800-347-5151. I probably didn't communicate very clearly a minute ago when we were talking about Jeff Bezos making $321 million every day. I guess it's about 329 million Americans, but just imagine if he could just say, yeah, I'll give you $1 million, I'll give you $1 million, I'll give you $1 million. It'd take a while before he could get everybody $1 million, but he could certainly over time. Or of course, if he just decided just one day, I'm going to take $329 million and maybe just find a few individuals or few ministries or few organizations to give a few millions to, how much significant that change would be. So, again, we can sit there all day and say, well, they have a lot of money, but I love the great story about Dave Ramsey. How he came up with $10 million is pretty amazing to me, first of all. Then second of all, to take that $10 million and instead of saying, I'm just going to spend it on myself or leave it to my kids or whatever, to say, let's just go and take $10 million, go to 2 different debt collection companies and completely forgive the debts to 8,000 people, and then let our team members get on the phone and tell people that, those debts that you've been worried about, they do not exist any longer. What a great story. Anyway, let's move on. We have not been able to connect up with Chuck Bentley, but that's okay. We have a lot more to cover. And one of the articles I've posted is a very good piece on what big tech didn't want you to see. And it is written, interestingly enough, by Joy Pullman, who is actually the executive editor of The Federalist. And I did not know much about her, but I don't know how I missed her, because she is an individual that graduated from Hillsdale College with honors. She is a mother of 6 children. Again, some of these super women, I don't know how they can have 6 children, edit The Federalist, and do all the writing she's done, because she has one on an Advent calendar. She got one on classic books for young children. But the other day you heard me say that we'd like to do something on Common Core. Well, she's the author of the book, The Educational Invasion, How Common Core Fights Parents for Control of American Kids. So we're going to get her on. But if you want to know a little bit about Joy Pullman, you can find this article and read about her. But her piece is very good, because she talks about the fact that Google, Facebook, and Twitter didn't want you to see anything from The Federalist. And so she is pointing out that not only have we had censorship of a lot of stories, many of the stories that were covered by The Federalist simply were not allowed to be on these social media platforms. And so, again, she points out how the media has skewed U.S. politics for decades. You might remember the article that I quoted from, that I eventually did a commentary on, in which they actually did a survey of many of the so-called swing states, and found that a number of those who voted for Joe Biden did not know about 8 different topics, 3 of which were sort of negative for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, 5 which were positive for Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and 17% of them, or about 1 in 6, said, if we had known this, we would not have voted for Joe Biden. So you can see that by censoring different stories, the big tech companies have been able to influence the election in some very significant ways. So if nothing else, here's just a short list of some of those, because she said in June, for example, you have various groups, a foreign think tank, NBC, Google colluded in an attempt to demonetize The Federalist in retaliation for its coverage of the rioting of Black Lives Matter. In July, Google claimed that it had mistakenly made it impossible for people to find some of the news sites. That would be the Washington Free Beacon, Breitbart, Twitchy, PJ Media, The Blaze, Town Hall, PragerU, the Daily Wire, and some of the others. After the election, Instagram slapped a warning label on a post in which President Trump honored Pearl Harbor, which is still amazing to me. In October, Twitter suspended U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan for a post celebrating the success of the U.S. southern border. And then, of course, the ones that most people are most aware of, if they've been listening to this program, just the evidence of some of the corruption involving the Biden family. And that, of course, would be the son of Joe Biden, the brother of Joe Biden, and others. And she goes on for really a couple of pages to document how that was completely blocked intentionally, because that would, of course, been negative news that could have affected the election. Then you have a whole section she has on evidence of election tampering and errors that goes on again for a couple of pages. And then finally, a whole section on just the coverage of the pandemic. It's under this section called COVID-19. And there are lots of illustrations, but probably the easiest one to identify is Alex Berenson, who's been on the program with us before. Last time he was on, we were actually talking about marijuana, of all things. But he's a former New York Times reporter who has been trying to get information out about some of the, if you will, misinformation about everything from lockdowns to masks and a variety of others. And, of course, you have the ban of the book by Amazon. And, of course, then all sorts of fact-checking that has been taking place on some of the articles in, of course, The Federalist, as well as banning some of the articles by Dr. Scott Atlas, who is, first of all, a physician. Second of all, has been at the Hoover Institute. Number 3, was on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And when you can actually ban somebody like that, what chance do you have of getting some of your information out, which again just shows how heavy-handed it is in that regard. And she goes on and talks about some other things which we really haven't talked about, the so-called Spygate, in terms of trying to get stronger information controls and things about that, the Spygate scandal and all of the rest, and takes us through a very long series of examples of how social media has used its influence, which is very great, to affect the election, to affect the free transfer and interaction and exchange of information. And a good illustration of why I think it is going to be even more necessary for people to spend some time thinking about what we're going to do in the future about big tech. But let me take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into some other issues, because we have some of these articles about everything from the fact that now they're having to register people who are deciding that they won't take the COVID-19 vaccine. Some people are talking about a COVID-19 vaccine passport. And, of course, an article I posted yesterday, which we never got into, about some of the core myths of defund the police. So lots of issues that I'm going to put on the table. And, of course, you can join the conversation at any point. But let me, as we go to a break here, encourage you maybe to think about what you would do during this break, to visit our website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Give Now. Like never before, we believe that Americans need truth. And I think this illustration I gave you a minute ago, if you're depending upon social media to get the truth, we're seeing more and more evidence every single day of censorship, and that censorship has been taking place when there's been at least a little bit of a pushback from the Trump administration. Imagine what it's going to be like if you have a Biden administration, and it's going to get worse. And so I hope that we can be your trusted source for news, information, commentary, and interviews. And if you appreciate that, don't forget that we have a $100,000 matching fund. We have not even come close to being able to use all of that up yet. So there's still room for you to join us, which means your gift of $100 becomes $200. I've seen some of you actually make a gift of $500 or more, some even of $1,000. And those gifts are doubled. So please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Or, of course, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. Come back and talk about all sorts of other issues in the news that you need to know about right after this.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I want to get into some other issues, but just kind of relating to something we were just talking about a minute ago, it isn't just that the mainstream media or sometimes big tech censor information. They also, and here's the key word, are uncurious. This is a very good op-ed that came out. I didn't post it, but I found it very interesting. I might even turn it into a commentary. Robert Ehrlich is the former governor of Maryland, also was a former member of Congress and even a state legislator. And he wrote this piece called "The Media Are In for a Nasty Surprise from the Biden Presidency." But he starts off by saying, "My favorite political word is uncurious." Now, I looked it up in the dictionary to make sure that's a word. It sounds like a made-up word, but no, apparently uncurious can actually be a word. And he says the reason is that it so perfectly captures the light touch that the national media's dereliction of professional duty at the very beginning of the Joe Biden era. Now, he goes into for a couple of pages, so I'm going to skip to the third page to just simply talk about the fact that, of course, sometimes the press has been lacking any kind of curiosity about scandals that have to do with certain individuals unless they get to be so blatant. Clinton administration during the 1990s or a variety of others that then finally are the case. But they were always looking for someone to, if nothing else, be kind of a villain, somebody that they can go after. And the answer to their desires happened on June 6, 2015, when Donald Trump and his family rode down the escalator on Trump Tower. Because now they had somebody they could actually go across and go after all of the time. And all of a sudden, whereas before there had been almost a lack of curiosity about the background of Barack Obama, for example. I mean, we've had people on this program that said they went to school with him, never saw him in class. They wondered what he actually did. He was supposedly the editor of the Harvard Law Review. Nobody remembers any articles or conversations they had, but just a complete lack of curiosity about all of that. But then down to the third page, he says that all changed. Trump 2.0, now the enemy and the establishment could engage. All of a sudden, now they are curious about everything. His previous marriages, his business operations, his children, beauty contests, his casino developments, his dealing with foreign governments, and of course, he says, his taxes. So all of a sudden, the media went from being uncurious to very curious and wanting to get answers for everything. But the point he's making is when, of course, Joe Biden came on the scene and it began to be more and more obvious that he was going to be the Democratic nominee, and eventually they assumed he was going to be the president, he says all of a sudden they developed again this sort of uncurious approach. And so despite implications about his cognitive decline, remember 2 years ago, people wondering about the dementia that might be affecting Donald Trump. Do you remember any of those people raising questions about Joe Biden? The allegations of sexual assault. Remember 2 years ago, we were talking about #Believe the Women, and now we don't, that one. And then unwillingness to take positions on controversial issues such as court packing. Also, the incredible amount of wealth that the Biden family have, having worked in the public sector, a son who apparently profited handsomely through various business deals and all this. And nevertheless, what he says is that the press was all of a sudden, once again, to use our favorite word here, uncurious. But he goes on to point out that what's going to happen is either they're going to have a really boring presidency because they aren't going to want to ask those questions, or maybe they're going to have all sorts of things surface that should have been vetted during the various primaries and campaign. But I thought it was kind of interesting that Robert Ehrlich has said that we went through a period, especially when you have a Democrat president like Barack Obama, the press was just very uncurious about a lot of these things, began to be intensely curious about Donald Trump, and now seems to be fading into uncurious areas and territories in that regard. And so it also, I think, leads to something else, and that is, I think, a lot of these media operations, which have always been dependent upon trying to drive people to whatever, the website, drive people to the television program, to the radio program, ranting and raving about Donald Trump, they're going to fade. As a matter of fact, right now, the viewership for many of the cable networks, and we're not just talking about CNN and MSNBC, we're even talking about Fox, have dropped precipitously. And if they don't have anybody to bash, any of a controversy to talk about, those people just aren't going to tune those in. And that's another implication of that idea of being uncurious. But let's, if we can, talk about the vaccine for a minute. I pretty much stay away from it because everybody sort of made their mind up about the vaccine. But this is a different issue. Because now, will you be required to get a vaccine? And will that requirement not only be mandated, but be recorded? So far, that hasn't happened in the United States, but it is now happening in Spain. In Spain, they have decided that they will have a registry of the people who refuse the COVID vaccine. The vaccine will not be mandatory, according to the health minister there, but whoever decides not to actually get the vaccine will be included and be actually listed in a registry, which will then be shared with other European Union countries. I think, unless you're really naive, you know where this is going, because it essentially says that in order to even travel from one EU country to another, which now pretty much have open borders, you're going to need what? A vaccine passport or some way to record that. And that is now being something that is also being discussed as well. This is an article that I have here from CBS in Boston, Massachusetts. And they said now that the coronavirus vaccines are starting to roll out in the United States and also abroad, many people may be dreaming of the day when they can travel, shop, and go to movies again. But in order to do so, those activities, you may eventually need something in addition to the vaccine, and that is a vaccine passport application. By the way, recognize this is being written in Boston, Massachusetts, right? Okay, so maybe what happens in Massachusetts doesn't happen in your hometown. Maybe it does. Several companies and technology groups, they say, have been developing smartphone apps or systems for individuals to upload details of their COVID-19 tests and vaccinations, creating digital credentials that can be shown in order to enter concert venues, stadiums, movie theaters, offices, and even other countries. And so you've got a couple of initiatives. I'll just mention those real quickly. One is called the Common Trust Network. That's an initiative by the Geneva-based nonprofit, the Commons Project, and the World Economic Forum. You know where that's going to take you, don't you? Has partnered with several airlines, JetBlue, Lufthansa, Swiss Airlines, United Airlines, Virgin Atlantic, and others. So you can see that this might be the pass. They're even showing a picture here of your phone. You've done this before if you've traveled, where you put that little QR code on there and it lets you in. Well, that will be what's called the Common Pass app. It's created by various groups, allowing users to upload their medical data, such as COVID-19 test results, and eventually a proof of vaccination by a hospital or medical professional, generating a health certificate or pass in the form of a QR code. And so you can see very quickly in this digital world, you might need to not just get the vaccine, but you'd actually have to show that you had the vaccine if you wanted to travel. And if you don't think that's going to happen in the United States, okay, maybe it doesn't right away. But already, if those of you that want to go to Spain, I think we have a pretty good idea that if in Spain they're going to register people who have refused the vaccine and then share that registry with other EU countries, can you kind of see where this is going? And so that's why we wanted to spend some time, of course, talking about this important issue as well. What are your thoughts? Are you ready to get a COVID vaccine passport? That's what's being proposed right now. And, of course, it is only being talked about. And, of course, it doesn't necessarily even have to be passed by Congress. You can see, as we've talked about in this program so many times, if private companies Private entities simply want to protect those individuals that are under their care, whether in a store, whether on an airplane, whether in a cruise ship or whatever, so that they are not liable for any kind of lawsuits. You can see very quickly how, even if this never even is considered in the House of Representatives or the United States Senate, how this could be implemented in sort of a de facto way. So it's one more issue that we wanted to cover here on Point of View. And if you've heard about that on another talk show, or maybe even heard about it on another television program, great. You can let us know where you heard about it. I suspect you just heard about it first, right here on Point of View. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
It has been about 25 years since God providentially led me to Point of View when I did not even know it existed. During this time, I have shared numerous taped programs with my family and incorporated the Outlook magazine and other articles into the homeschool curriculum I used in teaching our 5 children. Point of View receives no government funding, for which I am grateful. It is therefore my honor, privilege, and responsibility to support this organization of tremendous self-sacrificing people on a monthly financial basis.
Again, comment from one of our listeners. And again, if you have been one of the longtime listeners to Point of View and have been supporting us, I want to say thank you. I know some of you may be listening for the first time, and you might say, I don't know much about this organization. You can go to our website, pointofview.net. You're going to find lots of news, information, articles, commentaries. We've interviewed all sorts of individuals over these years. My Viewpoints commentary is there. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we'll be talking not only about my Viewpoints commentary, but Penna Dexter's. She'll be joining us along with Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty. And we just give you a chance to hear from a lot of individuals that have actually been out there making a difference. But most importantly, we're here to equip you to make a difference in your community, your sphere of influence, and to provide you with the information necessary so that you will be encouraged and empowered. Let's, if we can, maybe take some phone calls real quickly. We'll go to Texas, KBJS, and Sharon. I think you want to share a story with our listeners.
Yes, Kirby, I wanted to raise my hand when you were talking about the central database that they're creating on the other side of the pond. But I recently went to a nurse practitioner about an issue that had nothing to do with COVID. And they handed me a clipboard with a form on it. And told me it was, I said, what is this? He said, oh, it's something new. It's totally voluntary. Just, do what you want to do and hand it back to us. Well, it was a registration for a central database.
There you go.
And they wanted all the information about your vaccinations and all this stuff. So it's happening already here in the United States.
And I think the way you pointed it out was perfect, because we do have HIPAA rules. If you're not familiar with HIPAA, it's Health Insurance Portability and Accountability. And so you cannot necessarily but there are some exceptions to it, but in most cases share information, medical information about an individual. There are some various ways and you can get into that because if you're related to an individual, you can get a court order and a variety of others. But there's another issue, and that is, as we've pointed out before, these databases can be easily hacked. Anybody who doesn't think they can't be hacked hasn't had to get a new credit card because their credit card information was hacked. But you point out, Sharon, an entirely different issue. That is, well, it's voluntary. Well, if you voluntarily give up that information, then that is public knowledge and that is a database. And so in some respects, when people say, oh, they're not going to create a database, first of all, if you've been listening to Point of View any length of time, we've talked about some of these databases that have been created through public schools and a variety of other venues. The desire by this incoming administration to maybe want to even get a database of gun ownership and things like that. But this one circumvents all that, because if you give out that information voluntarily, then it is certainly available to other individuals. And of course, if you are in certain situations wanting to travel and you don't have your vaccine passport, you're going to have to explain either why you don't have it or go and get it. So I think in some respects, we can see where this is going to lead if we don't begin to speak out. So I appreciate you sharing your story about that.
Okay, may I speak to the young man that I talked to coming in?
Oh, sure. You mean our producer? Yes, I can put you back on hold, and you can chat with him because maybe he can give you some more information. Matter of fact, if you have some information you want to pass to, we will do that as well. By the way, the young man you're talking to, you'll love being called a young man, is Steve Miller. Of course, he's our producer. And let's, if we can, mention that. And, of course, there are all sorts of issues that I wanted to put on the table here. But I thought just before I run out of time, this one would be helpful for many of you looking for information, maybe to speak to the issue of law enforcement. And that is that yesterday we posted a piece, and it is written by a progressive police officer who actually has been in the Seattle police force. And I think it's so good because when you have somebody who is in Seattle who calls himself a person who wants to decriminalize drugs and advance the welfare state, okay, he's a liberal's liberal. But that being said, he says, look, I've also been a police officer for 26 years. I've served in the military first and now in Seattle. And so he's quite liberal. but nevertheless actually gives us 4 core myths of the hashtag defund police movement, of things like police are killing large number of civilians. He really sets that one aside pretty quickly, as does Heather McDonald and others. The anti-cop movement is largely peaceful. He said, no, that's completely false. I can tell you why. Number 3, that abolishing the police would lead to lawlessness. He says, come on, many of these people that want to defund the police are genuine anarchists and things of that nature, and they're really very dangerous people. And we had an experience in Seattle, he says, with the CHAZ, that would be the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and look at the violence that was there when the police were excluded. And then finally, the argument that today's police are militarized. He says, wrong, wrong, wrong. As a soldier, I rode in an armored vehicle, sat in a turret with a belt-fed machine gun. My job was to shoot enemy soldiers. He says, if nothing else, some of these SWAT team armored vehicles are there not to actually use deadly force, but to avoid deadly force. And so he really, in a sense, really takes on some of the social justice warriors, some of the people that think that defund the police is a good idea, and really sets it aside. And because it comes from a person who describes himself as a progressive, who's in Seattle, who was part of the Seattle police force, he really just brings a lot of credibility to his arguments. And so I wanted to mention that's just another great resource that we wanted to mention, which was available yesterday. It's on our website, in case you find some people saying, I think it'd probably be good. We just need to just defund the police. They're the ones that are causing all the problems, and we need to cut our police budgets and everything else. No, just the opposite. And of course, around this table, we support those of you who are first responders, whether you're in the police department, whether you're in fire department, whether you're legal, paramedical, various individuals that are actually on the front lines, doctors, nurses, emergency care workers, and all the rest. We support you and want to support you. And this is why I think this article may be one of the best I've found, because it's being made by an individual that has been in the police force for many years and knows that some of these arguments being used are fallacious, to put it mildly. Just before we wind down for today, don't forget that tomorrow is going to be our Friday weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. But I also want to challenge you to go to our website, even as we go off the air, and click on that banner that says Like Never Before. We have a $100,000 matching fund. We'd like to be able to have completed that by tomorrow night. And I know some of you wait to the last moment. Well, we're kind of at the last moment. So feel free to go to the website, Point of View, and click on that banner. But I've also heard that when I gave the phone number out, a number of you have made some phone calls. So let me encourage you to call this number, even though we're going off the air. It's 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. And I think you will find a number of great resources that we have posted today about the book, Hope When Your Heart is Breaking, 5 Steps to Improve Your Finances, and what Big Tech didn't want you to see, as well as some of the other great articles, including my Viewpoints commentary today. So all of it is available at our website, pointofview.net, or you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes, Steve as well for him in producing the program. We will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Christmas Day in Nashville. A bomb takes out 911 services throughout Middle Tennessee and all the way up into Kentucky and down into Alabama. Imagine needing emergency help and you can't get through to the person you need most. 2021 arrives a little more than a day from now, and as it does, will America get the help we need to understand the times and know what to do? With your help right now, the answer can be yes. Our $100,000 matching challenge ends after tomorrow. Right now, every gift you give is matched, doubled, by a friend who believes that Point of View Radio provides what America needs: understanding, truth, clear thinking, wisdom. Make a difference for the new year. Help give America the truth she needs. Take a moment right now to invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact when you give right now. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151.